I was recently watching the cinematic masterpiece, The Fifth Element, for maybe the 1000th time, when something at the end caught my eye. So they stopped the evil planet thing from hitting Earth, and everybody celebrates. The evil planetary entity is now just a big hunk of harmless rock out in space. The world was saved by the power of love. But this time something occurred to me that I'd never realized before.
They're still f***ed.
Because gravity still exists, right? And now there's this giant moon-shaped thing, like just hovering out there above the atmosphere. That's still a problem. So I decided to fix the ending of The Fifth Element. It's a little different now. All right, so we're going to be talking about the end of a movie, which means spoilers. So if you've been putting off watching this movie for the last 27 years, I mean, let's face it, you're never going to watch this movie, so you might as well watch this video. If you have seen the movie, then you know what happens at the end, but just in case anybody hasn't, let me see if I can just kind of sum it all up in 1 minute or so. In the movie The Fifth Element, there's a bad guy. Not that bad guy, this bad guy. This is a giant evil entity in space that, in this world, returns every 5,000 years to destroy all life on Earth. It doesn't really have a name, they just call it the Great Evil or the Dark Planet, but it does control Gary Oldman's character, Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg, and in a scene where Zorg gets a call from the Great Evil, his secretary tells him this.
I know, you don't want to be disturbed except if it's Mr. Shadow, and it's Mr. Shadow on the line.
So I'll be calling it either the Great Evil or Mr. Shadow for this video, or the Dark Planet. Anyway, the only way to stop the Great Evil is to combine 4 sacred stones, which represent the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and a 5th element, which turns out to be a genetically enhanced super being created by an alien race. This is Lilu, played by Mila Jovovich, and she's so important they dressed her in seatbelts to keep her safe. Anyway, the Great Evil has been using Zorg to steal the stone so that there wouldn't be a way to stop it this time. And that's what most of this movie is about. Zorg's trying to steal the stones while Lilu and Corbin Dallas, played by Bruce Willis, are trying to protect it. So at the end of the movie, they get the stones and they take him to this pyramid temple place to destroy the Great Evil, who at this point is flying toward Earth at a tremendous speed. But as the clock ticks down, they have to figure out how to activate the rocks, and even then it still doesn't work until finally Bruce Willis tells her he loves her, and at the last second he kisses her. And she's so disgusted by it, she vomits a gamma ray burst which stops the Great Evil in its tracks. And this is what I was talking about at the beginning of this video. Because the movie treats it like the Earth is saved. Done deal, pop the champagne, get busy in hyperbaric chambers and whatnot. But that's a huge problem. And this is the part of the video where we talk about why. All right, first of all, let's get a sense of what we're dealing with here. So we know how big it is and how far away it is above the surface of the Earth from a couple of lines in the movie.
There's a ball of fire, 1,200 miles in diameter, heading straight for Earth.
The planet seems to have stopped at 62 miles from impact.
Funny it's a French director and they use miles instead of kilometers, but anyway. 62 miles, by the way, just happens to be the exact same altitude as the Kármán line, which is considered to be the border of space, about 100 kilometers. I don't know if that was a coincidence or not, but it happens to be like right at the border of space. So right away, you've got this giant moon-looking thing literally at the border of space. So that's going to be a problem for some satellites. Now, of course, this is the future, so the satellites might have some technology that allows them to get around the planet up there, but for the sake of not losing my mind, let's just leave out any technology that might solve all the problems in this video, because the satellites are not even scratching the surface of the actual problem here. So this thing has mass, and it's going to fall down towards Earth, but also Earth is going to fall towards it, or at least part of the Earth. To know how much of the Earth is going to fly toward this thing, we need to calculate its mass. So we know its size, we know its shape, but what about its density? Because I mean, if it's lighter than air, no problem. It can just kind of bob on top of the atmosphere like a cork in water. Probably not the case, though. So earlier in the movie, it was glowing red, like it was partially molten, and there were jets of fire or plasma coming out of it. Now, this might be a star-like object, and what we're looking at is a ball of fusing gases, but it's kind of way too small to have enough gravity to sustain fusion. Now, something that small could be, say, a neutron star or like a quark star, but the gravity of something like that would be like crazy extreme. It would have sucked in the ships at the beginning and probably swallowed Earth whole. So I'm gonna go with the molten rock thing because it looks like molten rock, and then at the end when it kind of freezes, well, it looks like the moon or Mercury or something like that. Which, by the way, in some of the lore around the Fifth Element, some suspect that the actual moon was a previous great evil that got defeated. So that's actually out there that's sort of canon. So I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to go with it being a moon-like density. Earth's moon has a mean density of about 3,346 kilograms per cubic meter. So to find the mass, we cube the radius of Mr. Shadow, which is 1,931 kilometers, over 2, which comes out to 965.5 kilometers, and then multiply by 4/3 pi to get the volume. We then multiply the volume by the mean density, giving a mass of about 1.26 times 10 to the 22nd kilograms. So that's less than the moon. It's like a small moon, but that's still a lot of rock floating overhead. In fact, it would be the 6th largest moon in the solar system. Just hanging there. The good news is it won't be hanging there for long. The bad news is it won't be hanging there for long. So first thing that would happen is gravity would get weird. So look, we're used to thinking of gravity as the force that pulls us to the ground. That's an oversimplification. Gravity is exerted by every massive object on every other object with mass. And the closer objects are, the greater the attraction, because gravity falls off according to the inverse square law. Specifically, we're talking about the distance between the centers of the objects, so Earth's center to the center of Mr. Shadow. You can get that by adding the Earth's radius to Mr. Shadow's radius, and then add 100 for the space between them. Anyway, all this math tells us is that the gravitational force equals 9.081 times 10 to the 22nd newtons. Which probably doesn't mean anything to you, but it's a lot. It's 458 times stronger than that of the moon. And you know, funny thing about the moon, it causes tides. So let's talk about that for a second. Tides happen because the moon's gravity pulls all the ocean water towards it, and the sides facing each other feel the gravity the strongest. So the water around the planet creates a slight bulge. And the reason it seems to rise and fall throughout the day is because the Earth is rotating, so what we see as the tide rising and falling is really just us passing through the Earth's bulge. Insert immature bolts joke here. So yeah, if the moon can do that, what would a tidal force 458 times stronger do? The answer, a lot. So immediately, water from all around the world would pull toward this new moon in the sky, causing massive tsunamis all around the planet, and if it's above Egypt, which it seems to be in this movie, a just biblical flood would swell over Cairo from the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. Below Mr. Shadow, trees and buildings would be ripped out of the ground, any cars and unfortunate people would float off the ground like it was the rapture, which might be a good thing because it would get you away from all that rushing water. And then there's the atmosphere. All the air would flow toward this object as well, causing hurricane-force winds all around the planet. The air pressure around Egypt would increase, while on the other side of the world, it would get dangerously thin. So people in New Zealand might struggle to breathe and even see the sky turn black as the air rushes away from them. And last but not least, the land would be pulled toward the object as well. Yeah, the tidal force would cause the plates on the Earth's crust to shift and warp, causing earthquakes all over the planet, setting off volcanoes at the fault lines. So planet-wide hurricane-force winds, floods, volcanoes, earthquakes, and it hasn't even fallen yet. And when it does fall, chances are it won't be all in one piece. So in my video about the hypothetical Earth with rings, I talked about the Roche limit. So the Roche limit is this distance away from Earth, or any large object in space, where if something gets close enough, if it gets past that Roche limit, it'll be torn apart by tidal forces. Again, it has to do with that inverse square law that I was talking about earlier, so that, a large object, like say Mr. Shadow, it would feel the gravity on the closer side a lot stronger than it does on the far side, and that difference in forces eventually causes the rock to break apart. It's kind of like if somebody hands you a piece of paper and you go to grab it and you grab it too fast and the other person doesn't have time to let go, and the pull exceeds the strength of the paper and the paper rips. The same kind of idea. Actually, some of the old in the audience might remember the Shoemaker Levy 9 comet from 1992. It was torn apart when it passed by Jupiter and then eventually plunged into it, and it left a gnarly scar bigger than the Earth. So Mr. Shadow would most likely break apart and fall in sort of a elongated teardrop shape, assuming that it's in a fixed position. In this shot right after they freeze the planet at the end of the movie, you can see it is moving a little bit. It's hard to tell how fast it's moving. I personally doubt that it's anywhere close to orbital velocity, but I suppose one can make the argument that the filmmakers showed it moving to suggest that it was in orbit and it wouldn't just fall down to Earth like we've been talking about. In which case, everything would be fine, right? So we're going to consider that option as well. So there's two scenarios. Scenario 1 is if the dark planet is motionless and just hovering above the Earth. Scenario 2 is if it's at orbital velocity just above the Kármán line. Place your bets which will be worse. Here we go. Okay, here's scenario 1. Mr. Shadow gets blasted by Lilu's energy vomit and slows to a stop 100 kilometers above the Earth. It hangs in space for a moment before Earth's gravity starts to pull it down. Immediately, the Earth's oceans begin surging toward Egypt and the Mediterranean, causing massive kilometer-high tsunamis along coastlines, with Earth's rotation making it a little bit worse on east coasts. Of course, the tidal force wouldn't just affect water. Like I said before, Earth's crust would warp and shift as well. There would be catastrophic earthquakes all around the world, not to mention opening up dozens of volcanoes. Imagine like a couple dozen Krakatoas all going off at once. Or even a Yellowstone supervolcano. As the dark planet descends, cracks form along its surface as the bottom of the planet's pulled harder than the top, causing it to elongate and break apart. On the ground below, Lilu and Corbin might notice a lightness as the center of Earth's gravity moves towards the falling moon. And as it continues to fall, the Earth's gravity will continue to weaken until objects and people themselves begin to float. So inside the temple, Corbin and Lilu lift off the ground, scrambling to maintain control as they fly faster and faster into the ceiling, which I'm assuming has a hole at the top? Because that's how the beam came out, right? Let's assume there's a hole at the top. From this hole, they'd be able to stop themselves and watch as the dark planet breaks apart into a cluster of fragments, some large, some small, just raining down towards Earth for the next 2.5 minutes. It's then that they notice that off in the distance, a wall of water headed their way. It might look like a dust storm at first, but the distant roar sound getting louder and louder would give it away. And right about the time that they're able to rationalize that threat, they get distracted by the sound of like cannon fire off in the distance. And they look around trying to figure out where it's coming from, like maybe somebody's shooting at the planet for some reason. What they're actually hearing are sonic booms as fragments of the planet come raining down in the atmosphere at supersonic speed. And it's only now that they can look up and see individual pieces of the planet getting closer and closer and closer until... Well, exactly how bad would these impacts be? Well, if we look at the Chicxulub impact that wiped out all the dinosaurs, that impactor was thought to be around 80 kilometers in diameter. Mr. Shadow was 23 times larger than that. And as it broke apart, it would be like dozens of Chicxulub impacts happening at the same time. Now granted, the Chicxulub asteroid was traveling at around 20,000 meters per second. That releases a lot of kinetic energy. The Mr. Shadow remnants would probably only reach about 1,400 meters per second tops. But still, the sheer amount of mass falling to the ground would release 2 orders of magnitude more energy than the impact that, wiped out almost all life on the planet. Yeah. Lilu and Corbin ain't gonna make it, y'all. Literally everything in a 2-kilometer radius would be buried under the debris, and the impact would kick up enough dust and debris to cover the planet for hundreds of years. All this dust and debris would combine with the clouds of ash from the dozens of volcano eruptions going around that would trigger powerful lightning storms all over the planet. It would look like planet Earth was shorting out or something. The energy released from this impact would basically vaporize everything within thousands of miles from the impact, and it would basically set fire to that entire hemisphere. A hemisphere, by the way, that contains about 75% of the Earth's population. So yeah, that's pretty much gone immediately. By the way, in the movie, the president says what the population of the planet is in a line to the priest.
We're going to protect the life of some 200 billion of my fellow citizens.
So 75% of that is 150 billion people dead. That is a lot of people. Can that even be right? 200 billion people? Is that possible? That's like more than all the people that have ever lived in all of history. It's like 8 billion now. Hold on a second. Okay, looking at a population growth chart over the last 50 years, it's going up to 2021. So it's 3.77 billion in 1971, 7.9 billion. So that's 4.13 billion growth over the last 50 years. So if you just added 4.3 every 50 years to go forward to where the fifth element takes place, which is in 2263, that's the year that this takes place. So that would be about 22 billion. So that's just adding at the same rate as what we've been experiencing over the last 50 years. But you could also look at it logarithmically. So the growth from 1971 to 2021 was 209%. So if you applied 209% sort of cumulatively over the next, whatever, 200 years or whatever, it would go, let's see, so it'd be starting at 7.9 in 2021, it'd be 16.5 in 2071, 34.5 in 2121, 72.2 in 2171, and then 151 billion in 2221. And it would basically come out to about 316 in 2271. Wow. If you look at it logarithmically, that's actually not an inaccurate projection. I don't think it'll ever get that large, though. I think population is going to taper off a bit over time. It's more of an S-curve kind of thing. At least that's what I've read. It won't, however, taper off nearly as fast as it would at the end of the fifth element if that happened. I think it's safe to say this would be an extinction level event. On Earth, anyway. Thankfully, there are places like Flotsam Paradise where people can survive off of Earth, but Earth is totally screwed at the end of the fifth element. So that's scenario 1. But then there's that second scenario where Mr. Shadow goes into orbit, which obviously would be safer because it would stay in space and not fall to the ground, right? Right? Okay, remember how I was talking about how the gravity of this object would affect the tides and pull on the tectonic plates and set off earthquakes and volcanoes and all that? Yeah. Imagine that flying all the way around the Earth every 90 minutes. So not only would that create, like, biblical tidal waves and flooding and set off volcanoes all around the world, it would eventually cause so much heat from friction, it would literally evaporate the oceans and melt the Earth's surface. Of course, the Roche Limit rule still applies, so the dark planet would do the teardrop thing and break apart, and since there is still some atmosphere at 100 kilometers, it will slow these pieces down, causing them to rain down on the planet, burning up through the atmosphere, possibly creating enough heat to just set the atmosphere on fire. There would be multiple, maybe dozens, of Chicxulub-sized pieces crashing down all over the world at almost Chicxulub velocity. So yeah, just one Chicxulub after another as these things enter the atmosphere. Now eventually the pieces of debris that were high enough to not get pulled in by the atmosphere would probably form a nice little ring, which I'm sure would be nice to look at. Of course, the ground below it would be a charred out husk covered with thick clouds of smoke, ash, and water vapor. Earth would basically look like Venus, but with rings. Yeah, even the roaches and tardigrades would be checking out at that point. Yeah, unfortunately, pretty much any way you slice it, the end of the fifth element is a massive disaster. Like, just everything's over on Earth. Even love. Mr. Shadow won. Zorg won. I mean, he's dead, but he still won. I guess if there's a moral to the story, it's, that I overthink things. Kind of a lot. I spent time on this. That and, if the world is being threatened by a planet-sized evil entity, maybe don't put all your hopes on some washed-up cab driver who barely has a license. Instead, you should heat up delicious meals in 2 minutes with today's sponsor, Factor. Factor is a meal delivery service that delivers restaurant-quality meals right to your door, and all you have to do is heat it up. 2 minutes in the microwave. Done. And they come in a range of options that you can choose from based on your own dietary plan, from Calorie Smart, vegetarian, keto, pescatarian. You've got dozens of options to choose from. And all the options are dietitian approved, so you can feel good about eating it, which you're going to feel good when you eat it anyway. It's really healthy, and they're decently portioned. I always feel full when I'm done, but not like I'm going to burst. So I find that developing good habits kind of starts with removing any obstacles that might be keeping you from doing the right thing. And that's what I like about Factor. It's less expensive than ordering out from a restaurant. It's way faster than ordering from a restaurant, but it still tastes like you're ordering from a restaurant. So it's actually easier to do the healthy thing. That's huge. My favorite thing about it is that they're not frozen. I get asked this a lot. People think that they're like stuff in the frozen food aisle, but they're not frozen. It's fresh, so you don't get that weird freezer burn texture to it. And if you're concerned about the environment, which you're right to be, all their packaging is recyclable and made from recycled products when possible. They've also got delicious breakfast and gourmet options if you want to just kind of take your meal up a notch, and they've got these amazing smoothies that you've got to try. So I've been a customer of Factor, and I mean, yes, an actual customer, for like a couple of years now, and like the reason it works for me is as somebody who works from home, getting lunch in the middle of the day, it's always a whole thing. You gotta like figure out what to eat, dig through your refrigerator or whatever, or order something from a restaurant, wait for it to get there, or go out somewhere. It just kind of breaks the flow of what I got going on. But Factor, it's like it cuts down on decision fatigue. I don't have to think about it. Just grab something out of the fridge, 2 minutes in the microwave, and I'm eating, and it's delicious, and it's healthy. Factor's a problem solver. And if you go to factor75.com or click on the link below and enter the code JoeScott50 at checkout, you'll get 50% off the first box and 20% off each box for the next month. So if you've been considering Factor, just give it a shot. They change up their specials pretty often, so this 50% off thing might end soon. Half off is a good time to try anything new. Just saying. Anyway, one more time, just click on the link down below in the description or just scan the QR code or right here and you can enter JoeScott50 at checkout. You get half off your first box, 20% off your next month of boxes. So give it a try. I think you'll like it. All right, thanks so much for watching. If this is your first time here, welcome. I do videos like this all the time where I just kind of like take weird things and break them apart. This is a informational, interesting kind of channel. I would invite you to watch this video where I did the Earth with rings thing. I examined what it would take to have the Earth have a set of rings. It was actually really fascinating. We had some really cool art that we put into that, so check that out. Or you can look down on the side if you're on your browser. Anything down there with my thumbnail and face on it, I invite you to subscribe if you enjoy it. I come back with videos every Monday. But that's it for today. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week. Stay safe, and I'll see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care.